Welcome everyone to this virtual webinar. Let's start all over again. This webinar will be about SEPs and IoT licensing. And we will start with some slides on market trends before we talk and discuss with our panel that we have here today. And when we talk about IoT and those technologies, we often talk about what people call low power wide area technology, specifically designed for requirements of wide bandwidth and low power and a deeper network coverage. We have some technical experts here that can explain you what that is. And often these LPWA technologies are referred to, or technologies that enable that and deploy that, are NB-IoT, LTE-M, or also LTE-Cat1. Those technologies have similarities, but they also have distinct technical advancements to them. When we look into the history of that, cellular IT modules really started with 2G, 3G technology, but today we have very many technologies that basically can serve the IoT use case. And the most used ones and famous one are NB-IoT that have been worked on or deployed since 2019. Followed also by Cat1, LTE-Cat1, that has been in the market even since 2014. They all have different advantages and different characteristics as to a technology of what they provide. If you look at some market statistics, however, we see, for example, here it's the cellular M2M module market forecast between 2019 and 2026. And we do see that a large number of those IoT modules are projected to implement NB-IoT and LTE-M technologies, followed by LTE-Cat1. A similar visual of market trends even sees NB-IoT as the leading technology, followed by some other technologies here in the market. Also quite interesting, the GSMA has a public list of all those networks that are already providing those technologies. And for example, for LTE-M, we have 60 networks worldwide. For NB-IoT, we have 110. In total, we have 170 IoT networks. And you can see at the website, actually the slide here also provides the link to that website in the very bottom, that, for example, in the United States, we have both technologies available, LTE-M and NB-IoT. For example, provided by AT&T as the provider. So we have network deployment of those technologies worldwide, covering typically both technologies in all markets. One thing we, of course, want to discuss today about is that those technologies are subject to what people call SEPs. And mainly those technologies have been developed in course of the LTE technology. But LTE, of course, is a huge standardization project. Over 1,000 standard specifications relate to LTE alone. And not all of these specifications describe IoT, NB-IoT, or LTE protocols. And that also means not all of these SEPs are relevant and need to be implemented into different implementations of these technologies. And to understand which patents are relevant and which are not, one need to really look in more details, not only into every patent that has been declared, but also into more details of which of these patents, but also technical specifications are really NB-IoT and LTE-M relevant. And that is, of course, a big question that has been discussed in the industry, which of these patents are relevant and which are not. And with several discussions with subject matter experts, I got to learn that technical specifications may be relevant to NB-IoT, but even a patent declared to those may still not be essential because certain sections only relate to those protocols. So you have to be very precise in mapping certain documents and versions to claims and sections. What we have done, at least at the very broad beginning of analysis like this in IPlytics, we have identified the specifications that are relevant for NB-IoT, that at least you can have a starting point to go with. And then you can do the manual work, if you like, and claim chart and understand which claims and sections belong together. What I want to discuss, however, today with our established guest here is understanding several topics a little bit better. IoT and SEPs is just starting. This is not an established licensed market like we have in the smartphone world. Not even automotive. We have just first licensing deals, and we have here, which is great, people that have been involved in these first deals. But before we go and talk about those complex licensing questions, and before we talk about SEPs, I would like to talk about the market first and understand which IoT use cases implement those standards today and where do we see the market trends. Let us start, however, with an introduction round of our panel here, and I would say ladies first. Julia, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, team. Yeah, so I have a background in physics and IP law. I have worked for, early in my career, I worked for startups. And then when it came to my legal experience was actually, we started with European Patent Office and then Huawei. With Huawei, I've been with Huawei for nearly 4 years now. And since then, I have actually supported major litigation and policy projects. And I'm now responsible for European SEP front policy and some relevant automotive and IoT projects, licensing projects.
Great. Thank you for the kind introduction here. Patrick, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. So Patrick Hammaren, and by education, I'm a lawyer and a Master of Science. I've been with Nokia for 16 years, and I'm currently responsible for our IoT program. So responsible for our IoT patent licensing in all of the areas.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. Sven.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim, for inviting this panel today. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Sven Tornger, and I'm a lawyer by background. I'm also the program manager for the CISFL Cellular IoT pool that was launched a few months ago. My legal background goes back about 15 years, where I am a transactional lawyer, meaning that I work with agreements and try to get parties to agree on a number of things. I've been focused on IP for more or less my entire career, and mainly on SEPs in both bilateral and pool settings.
Great. Thank you so much, Sven. And then last but not least, Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So yeah, I'm Christian. So I am in Nordic Semiconductor, where I am the product director responsible for everything we do on the product side for Cellular that we talk about today. So my background, I'm a Master of Science in Engineering Cybernetics, so I'm an engineer basically. I'm been on the engineering-product side in the semiconductor market for roughly 20 years in engineering, application, product, and marketing for microcontrollers, ultra-wideband security, cellular, different type of radio technologies. So really background from, should we say, the IoT side, the component side of the market.
Great. Thanks for the introduction here. And I would suggest now let's dive into the discussion. And I would also start with you, Christian, because, you know, with your product background, marketing background, I want this first part of the webinar to talk about the market of IoT, because I have a lot of questions here, and I really would love to understand, you know, especially from Nordic Semiconductor as a chip manufacturer, where are these IoT market that use NB-IoT or LTE-M or other IoT standard related technologies? Do you have any particular market focus? Where do your clients and chips end up? Can you give us a little bit of an understanding where those markets are at the moment?
Yeah, so I think you said it initially, Tim, that this is a bit of an emerging market. If you look at cellular connectivity in IoT, IoT overall is I would say in many ways a kind of mature market, especially on consumer, with billions of connected devices, and we see cellular as the next big trend in connectivity for IoT. I would say not so much in consumer-related application, not yet. So where Nordic sees this market is that, especially in North America, it's a fairly developed market for utility metering and public infrastructure already. And then we see a big global emerging market for tracking, all type of tracking, for asset tracking pharmaceuticals, cold chain, and these kind of use cases, because cellular can promise this global connectivity without gateways, with high security and high reliability, right? Which no other technology can do. So we see that as a really leading market today, at least for Nordic and where we play and what we offer in the market. We have modules that support both LTE-M and NarrowBand IoT. So as you mentioned initially, there is good amount of network today that support both, but there is also a fragmentation with either or. So if you want to build regional or global product, you need access to both technologies. So that's what we focus on today, I think, primarily in our business. And then we see definitely that in healthcare and other areas, there's a trend towards cellular that we think will grow dramatically in the next years because of use cases in sustainability, demographics, and other challenges in that area.
I mean, for me, it's very obvious that everything that moves, right? Cellular is the dominant technology because, you know, otherwise you could use other technologies that are local. Is there any particular market that has been strongly increasing, you would say, in the last, let's say, 1 or 2 years, or you have some market projections where this will go?
Yeah, for us, clearly it's asset tracking, and maybe it's a very broad term, but I think maybe I can say a bit about Nordic because we are a mass market company. We are 40% market share in Bluetooth Low Energy by selling distribution in mass market models. So we approach a lot of SMEs. So we see a lot of different use cases. So I won't point to certain type of applications, but we see starting to say up this interesting use case of smart labels, right? You can put on packets and everything to control where they are. They're handling their temperature. We see this cold chain use case that I mentioned, as you say, Tim. It's global product, but we also see tracking of dogs and cats and in agriculture, all type of things that moves around, right? Where you don't want to rely on local connectivity and build your local private network. So it's a broad, diverse market, right, with many applications, but this overarching theme that it travels regionally or globally, and you don't want to rely on building your private infrastructure or gateways to have connectivity.
Interesting. No, that's very exciting to understand. Going over to you, Sven, of course, being responsible for the first ever pool in NB-IoT LTE-M, you probably also did your homework before you set that up and looked at the market options or potential, the potential licensee market, which are your customers in the end. Any comments on that? Where do you see the majority of companies? What industries can we expect to see there? What are the use cases?
The type of companies in the pool, or what do you mean in the?
No, the licensees, basically those that will take a license that you will approach to, pay the royalty fees for an SEP pool. The user.
I see. Maybe I can start explaining a little bit about the SISO pool, and I can go into that question second. So I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, the SISO pool was just set up, and I think there clearly is a need for some kind of a pool solution in this market. And I think it's very clear from that, based on what we experienced during the process when we set it up. From the outreach to when it actually deployed, it took about 6 months, which is very quick in this kind of context. Usually it takes a couple of years or something like that. It's usually quite complicated. You need to talk to a lot of companies and get them to agree before you get to. So 6 months is a very, very quick time. I think that shows the need for a solution like that on the market, at least from an IP holder perspective. I think when it comes to what kind of companies there, I think the composition of the pool is also quite interesting, because in the cellular area, it's a bit of an ecosystem. You have a large range of companies participating, and the participation in the pool reflects that ecosystem as well. You have infrastructure players, you have network operators, you have component manufacturers, device manufacturers, you have research institutions, NPs, etc. And all of those companies are represented in this pool. And I think that shows that the offering it has is probably something that will work for the market, and hopefully will be positively received by the rest of them as well. I think when it comes to the need from the licensee perspective, I think it's very clear that something is happening in the cellular IoT arena at the moment. You see, it has been slow for the last few years, but it is really taking off at the moment. I think we've seen a report from last year where we've seen an increase of like 40% of the number of devices or number of models of devices on the market just over, like, I believe it was a 9-month period, not even for a 12-month period. And I think you see the same thing on the network side as well. So it's an exciting time to be in this cellular IoT arena.
Is there any market that you think, as when you think about the licensees, I know you just set it up and you're probably not there yet even, but is there any market potential that in particular that you're targeting first? Or is that, I mean, if it's not to be shared with the public, that is fine too, but.
No, I think that that's pretty public information. I mean, if you look at these technologies, and I mean, even if you put them in comparison with each other, if you look at NB-IoT and LTE-M, I think it's pretty clear that NB-IoT is a very good technology for fixed items that don't move very much. It has very long range. It has a range of 10 to 15 kilometers, and it can also go quite deep under the ground. So I think this is a good technology for permanently fixed items such as smart meters. So if you look at the market data, I think that reflects that as well. So smart meters is probably the biggest segment that we see, at least in this arena. When you look at LTE-M, it's good for mobile items. So I think the biggest verticals we see there is probably the asset trackers. Looking ahead, I think we may see a shift soon. Christian may know more about that. But one thing that we're hearing on the market now is that security becomes important. And I think that's also true for utility meters, such as electricity and gas and water. It's important to protect the data they are sending. And LTE-M seems to be a technology that have more of the security protocols in place and may prove a good technology for those solutions in the future as well.
Great, interesting. Thank you very much, Sven. Let's hand over to Julia. Huawei is also a player in the market. Can you give the audience a little bit of background about the market position of Huawei, their products, your clients, and how you see the market evolving?
Sure. I would say as some of the other major patent owners, Huawei is also an implementer in IoT, and we are present in the IoT industry and supply chain. Among other things, we actually sell dongles and MiFis, these portable cellular Wi-Fi devices, and other things depending on the broader definition of IoT. But due to some restrictions, we are not as big of an implementer as maybe we wish as of now. But yeah, so similar to the automotive industry, we are an active participant, both as an implementer. So we are very much aware of the positions and the difficulties that licensees face, as well as licensors. So yeah, so there isn't much I can add here, Tim, but yeah, I think that's all I can say. We are definitely a terminal, an end product maker, and yeah, and for the others, there are some constraints.
No, thank you very much, Julia, for those insights on Huawei. And Patrick, now to you. I guess Nokia is also not only a SEP owner, but also an implementer, right?
Yeah, that's correct as well. Of course, from the Nokia Technologies point of view, our primary concern is with the patent licensing side of the business. So that's what we focus on from the technology side.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about SEPs now. And maybe back to you, Christian. LTE, I think NB-IoT or LTE-M are technologies that came through the LTE development, but they are just parts of LTE. Can you, from a technical background, elaborate a little bit on this and why those technologies have to be distinguished and why they are different and how they are different, and why maybe also that is why not all standard essential patents essential to LTE may be essential to those technologies?
Yeah, I think that's probably good to clarify, Tim, because we tend to talk about this in broad aspects like the 4G and 5G. So LTE-M and NarrowBand IoT is really, you can call it a subset of 4G and later 5G, which is the lowest two categories that are defined, which implement a subset of what you typically see as the needs in a cell phone. So if you look at those two standards, they are defined for use cases that are typically need very, very low power consumption. So there is some additional features, functionalities to achieve lower power consumption than in higher category standards. They're only half duplex, so you only need single receive transmit, which greatly reduces cost and complexity, both on component level and on end device level, versus this higher category devices that typically are full duplex and read multiple receivers and multiple transmitters. They're very uplink centric, these devices, if you look at them from device point of view. If you look at use cases, especially in the tablets and smartphone, you can argue that they are typically downlink centric today, right? You are streaming data, you're streaming audio, you're streaming video. These standards are developed to be more uplink centric devices that are sleeping most of the time, and they're waking up sometimes every day, typically, to send a little bit of data because they are sensor centric. You talk about asset trackers, but even an asset tracker is some type of sensor. In that sense, you're traveling around, and at some point something happened and you decide you need to send some data. So that's typically how the standard is used, very, very different than what you're used to in the higher category standard for smartphones, especially.
And that's also why they're called low power, right? Because they're
they're low power. You can on component level, you can build a much simpler radio than you need to do for higher category full duplex or multi-receive type of radios, and you have this additional features that temporarily the many knows is PSM and EDRX, for example, where you can put the devices to sleep, and they can either be woken by a network, or they can also be woke up themselves and decide themselves when they want to connect back to the network, which is vastly different from higher category standards. And that's why you can build, very small devices with small batteries that have 10 years of lifetime deep in the field, basically using these standards. And also why it can be part of the huge IoT market, because you can now achieve similar size, similar cost, similar battery life that you only before could do with non-cellular technologies, such as 2.4 gigahertz or sub-gigahertz radios.
Interesting. Great. Sven, now I know that setting up that pool also means you have to identify not only the members, but the members have to identify from their portfolios those patents that are to be pooled, which must be essential. That's part of the major, reason why you're even allowed to set up a pool like this. Can you maybe explain the audience a little bit how that works in a patent pool, and and why maybe also for NB-IoT there are particular cases of how to identify which patents read on those NB-IoT or LTE-M technologies?
Sure, I can do my best from my legal background, but I would assume that both Christian and yourself are probably in a much better position to do this in more detail. I think that both of you have actually touched upon this before, and doing this within NB-IoT and LTE-M is not a very easy task. If you compare it to other cellular technologies such as LTE or 5G, I mean, they are specific standards, while LTE-M and NB-IoT is, like you mentioned, are subsections of those standards. And it's not always clear which part of those subsections that are relevant for these two technologies, which means that someone who wants to find out need to go in and review these documents more or less paragraph by paragraph. This can be quite challenging because we're talking about hundreds of different specifications here, and so it's a quite labor-intensive work. So that is something that we and the patent owners are working very hard on at the moment, and we hope to complete that work quite soon. I think other things that makes it difficult to look at in this area is that the terminology that was used. So when they started to develop these technologies, they didn't know what they were going to be called in the beginning. So LTE-M, for example, is an acronym that haven't been used very much in these documents. So if you do simple searches, it may be hard to see for relevant patents. It may be hard to find the relevant ones because depending on what kind of keyword searches you use, so you need to be quite careful there, I think. There are some, I mean, even if it is hard to say exactly where you find things, I think there are certain areas where you can find more of the relevant inventions than in others. So you have the 36 series, for example, or you also have like the TS24, where I think you may see a high concentration of relevant patents.
Interesting. To you, Patrick, I'm sure Nokia has a good understanding of what patents are mapping to LTE. For those technologies, did your team or technical staff also went back to the portfolio and mapped those to the particular NB-IoT LTE-M technologies?
Yeah, so I actually think Sven gave a very good overview of how this kind of works. I could maybe add that, of course, from our side, our technical teams are quite active in the contribution process itself and are participating in the standardization. So they have a little bit more visibility also to how the kind of standards develop while they're kind of being developed. So they can actually participate in that and map our patents at that stage already. But otherwise, I think Sven kind of summarized it extremely well.
Interesting, thank you. And Julia, is it fair to say that that means that only a fraction of the LTE essential patents are then relevant for those particular technologies? Is that how you also typically see that in your portfolio, or is it a huge part, a large part?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for low power wide area, that comprises, you know, NB-IoT and LTE-M relevant patents, then of course that's a subset of the entire LTE portfolio. And for that, that's actually what we did with Nordic. So we had to know which patents and the portion of our portfolio that was relevant to them, and the portion of the portfolio that was relevant, you know, in the global scheme of things. Yeah, so I mean, and that's what we do also internally. We have, similar to what Sven and Patrick said, we have also an internal system for patent portfolio evaluation. And we have a workflow that enables the identification of which patents are mapping which standard. And so we basically have a database that's is sorted out by a technical topic, and each topic has a responsible manager with patent experts, and these patent experts are also aided by inventors, so people that are participating in these standard set developing organizations meetings. And basically each team is in charge of drafting claim charts. There will be frequent reviews of together with the inventors of the claim chart analysis, and there will be various changes to the claim charts as the portfolio and the standard evolves and the patents become more mature. So it isn't something static, I have to say. So and our experts will check the patents that map to a standard and add any information, including, you know, technical standard, version section, and other details that might be relevant, including the type of usage. So yeah, so that's but that's a bit more difficult because to do because not all markets are developed, and maybe at first patent owners may not see a portfolio to be so valuable. So that may come at a later stage, and that's something we have to do at a later stage, maybe a little bit squeezed with time. But yes, I mean, that's a given especially for portfolios that are being implemented in mature markets like, you know, the handset industry. So yeah.
Yeah,
and maybe I can add a little bit there too. I think in addition to the patents that you have identified in the portfolio, I'm sure that Huawei has many other relevant patents too, because it's one thing with these standards that, you know, they mainly aim for low powered devices. So there are a few parts of the LTE standards that are specifically aimed at achieving that purpose, for example. But if you put in a licensing perspective, that would not be sufficient, because in order to be able to use one of these devices, you also need to be able to connect to the LTE network. So that means that even if it's not an LTE or LTE-M or NB-IoT specific part of the standard, you also need all the fundamental ones, where I assume Huawei has a lot of patents as well. And that makes it even trickier when you look for these things. You both need to look for the specific areas of the standards that's relevant, and for the more general and fundamental one that all kind of LTE devices would need to use.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are like other patents that might be relevant connected to the markets, the industry we're talking about. Yes. So yeah, so it's like I said, it's a process that it's a continuous work for our teams, because some of the markets, we weren't expecting to be as mature as as we thought maybe a few years ago or something. But also we are a company with a huge portfolio that has hasn't had licensing its main business, and it's not still. So so it's a huge workload, and also we have a young portfolio compared to other patent owners, traditional big patent owners that were there since 2G. So yeah, so that's yeah, so agreed with Sven.
But interesting. So that means basically we have certain patents very specifically for those protocols or technologies like NB-IoT, LTE-M, and then there are general, LTE patents that are still needed, or in legal language that you would use and infringe. We're just connecting to the network, right? Is that how I understand it? And
yeah, no, I think that is correct. So I mean, it's one thing when you do these kind of landscape analysis. That's why often it can be easy for younger companies to pop up, because they are more IoT specific devices. Yeah. While when you do deeper search, the true numbers may reflect that companies like Huawei, and also of course Nokia, who's been in this game for many years, have a significant portfolio. Because they have all of these other patents that you also would need a license for.
Right. But is it fair to say, maybe then back to Patrick, that those patents that are core compared to those are use case specific, would you value them the same, or are they considered all the same, or is there any differentiation, or it doesn't matter because they're infringed and you have to license them?
I think you're asking a slightly too wide a question to answer categorically. I think if you're utilizing the patents, then you will need to pay for them, and what the kind of portfolio price is determines then the price. I think finding a value for individual patents like that is kind of on a conceptual level a little bit too difficult.
Right. No, it's a tricky question. I'm sorry, but I mean, I was just thinking what it means to connect to the network, how much technology is really used compared to those specific use cases then. But I well understand these are very in-depth questions in licensing negotiations. I may not even go that far to simplify the process. And I'll also very much appreciate it. And I think that's always a tricky one. Two moving targets, a patent yet pending, claims are not final. Even if final, they can be, changed still. And then the moving standard, mapping that on a continuous basis means also portfolios change. And, I think that is actually a good way to go to the next question. How can licensing work with that? And I think what I found super interesting here today, that IoT and SEPs, there hasn't been much licensing going on, at least not on the surface, to put it that way. Publicly known license agreements have not been many announced. A pool has just been set up, but the majority of licensing deals are just up to come, right? And one of the first announcement publicly was that Nokia had a contract with Nordic Semiconductor, and I would love you, Patrick, to elaborate a little bit on that contract, because it wasn't a direct license contract. It was more an offer to the basically the customers of Nordic Semiconductor that they could use a Nokia license directly when they buy the Nordic Semiconductor chip, right?
So just to kind of clarify also my thinking on IoT, so you understand my answer better. So I actually think automotive is a field within IoT. So when you say that there haven't been that many licenses, I actually think that there have been very many in that specific vertical. I think what you are seeing now is that there is a very fragmented market. So you have kind of various different verticals, and you haven't seen a lot of agreements in some of the verticals yet, because some of those verticals are not that established as of now. Yeah. But IoT in general, I would say that we have started to see licensing, and we have noticed that the kind of old licensing principles from other verticals actually work quite well in this space as well. With regards to the Nordic question, so I think we're kind of in a stage in IoT as well that we're testing different go-to-market models. And one of the feedbacks that we received from the market was that companies don't have access to licenses, they don't have kind of full understanding because their suppliers are not involved in the discussions and so forth. And the Nordic model was one where we tried to tackle these issues in collaboration with Nordic as well, and we appreciate that opportunity. I think the market feedback that we have received through kind of the amount of agreements that we have signed this way has shown that access to licenses has not necessarily been the issue for resolving these topics. So I think that was a test that we did, and we got more feedback of how the market operates, and it's a good way to understand the market, but it's probably not the way that this market will be licensed in the end.
No, well understood. And of course, the IoT market is not a market. It is a technology that tackles different market segments, automotive being one. You know, now thinking about the Sysvel pool with this low power, you know, wide bandwidth, I mean, that as a market, let's take that as a market, NB-IoT, LTE-M. From a Nokia perspective, are you approaching this market similar as the automotive, meaning mainly, you know, targeting OEMs, or exclusively targeting OEMs, meaning the device manufacturers, the end market product manufacturers?
We are, and we have actually seen some licensing success in that field as well. So it is visible that the companies are actually willing to actually engage in proper discussions. With Sysvel in particular, so we actually think it is a good pool, and we think that there's a need for this type of activity. We're very actively discussing with Sven, for example, to see what type of collaboration we can do, but in the current form, we have not been able to fit that into our kind of current go-to-market model and to the kind of vertical thinking that we have for the different areas of IoT. Okay,
well understood. So just for the audience to know, as background information, Nokia has not joined the Sysvel pool, at least yet, while other companies like Ericsson, for example, have joined the Sysvel pool. In terms of the strategy of how to license, any comments here, Patrick, on market fragmentation? Because at least that is the rumor. IoT devices have a lot of end product manufacturers. There's a long tail of smaller companies. Do you see this as well, or is it, again, depending on the market fragment, different, and still, you know, approaching OEMs in terms of your strategy is the right way to approach it?
So I actually think that when I started looking at, for example, the handset licensing kind of years back, the argument was the exact same, that it's so fragmented, there are so many players in the market. But when you actually look at the kind of key companies that you need to license in order to capture a very large portion of the market, it is actually not very fragmented. And then if you can do the same for the IoT market, that is split it into verticals and start looking at the companies that are actually relevant, then the fragmentation is not really an issue for us. So as long as we're kind of able to do agreements with the key companies, it shouldn't be an issue to kind of cover this license through the end product market as well.
So to understand your answer correctly, there are enough big players that have so high or much of a market share that you may not even consider, let's say, a Berlin startup that develops that small device, but they only have a few million of revenue. So you would not consider them, or they keep them under the radar, right?
I think what you're trying to understand in a way is that how do you capture this market and the majority of it? So kind of, I think my answer would be that actually by going and securing a license with the large companies, you are able to capture a very meaningful portion of the market. And yes, there will probably be a number of smaller companies that are not kind of captured this way, but for the overall exposure of your licensing, they will probably not have as much of an issue.
Okay, no, well understood. Thanks, Patrick. To you, Julia, and the Huawei approach, there is a publicly announced license with Nordic Semiconductors, and they are typically a supplier. So Huawei is offering licenses also on other value chains. Can you elaborate on your approach to licensing and why you not only go for the OEMs and end product manufacturers, but also go up the value chain?
Sure. So, I mean, in IoT, we have taken the position of licensing to all. So licensing flexible in supply chain. But I have to say that what I see personally is that for Huawei's licensing team, as well as for the implementers, also based on what we've heard so far directly from them, is that it's actually more efficient to license to one single level in supply chain. This is this is what I've experienced so far. But also what they say is that if a solution, if there is a solution for them that is suitable for that particular industry. So, again, what Patrick said, IoT, automotive, or general IoT, then I think that one-stop shop, one-stop solution may be an adequate one, and might be suitable for them, and there will be an easier way. I think that's the key point, easier way to handle SEP licensing from their side. But now there are a few things that I think we should stick to. So the license rate should be the same regardless of the level in the supply chain. And I also think that ideally the players, if the players at the same level in supply chain took the license, then it would be much easier. Because the cost could be passed down. If, let's say, we're talking about the supplier, then the cost could be passed down to the OEM or customer. And this way, the suppliers then would be able to stay competitive, and like they would stay at the same competitive level. So no disadvantage, as they would all be paying for the front license. So, but that's in the ideal world. So, but what I've seen is that this isn't always possible. So. I mean, and we have that first-hand experience in the automotive. Okay, so and this is, I think, because many of the suppliers have offered IPR indemnifications that might be inadequate to cover the IPR, the real IPR costs of cellular technology. So and that might leave the OEMs in a complicated and vulnerable position, perhaps sometimes out of pocket. So yeah, so that's like just for me generally. But now if we focus on the IoT, so the general IoT, like we'll be talking about today, we think that the licensing at module level is more efficient. This is why we are focusing on that, and that's why we haven't joined CISVL yet. Maybe at some point it really depends on how things evolve. And this is because there aren't many. So if we look at the module market for IoT, so cellular module market, we see that there aren't many players. Perhaps the majority of percentage sales in globally, they belong to maybe less than 10 companies. I might be not super accurate here, but so these major companies, module makers, they are actually very large, and they should be able to negotiate with us. But for this to work well, I think all of them have to take a license, and if it's only a few companies taking a license, then again we would be putting some module makers in a disadvantaged position. So we hope that. So I think now to resolve that problem, I think we need IoT OEMs to be more aware of this issue, and to be able to also have greater business certainty in the long term. They need to check that. They need to make sure that these module vendors are offering responsible IPR indemnifications. And I think Nordic is a good example. I wanted to say that today. Yeah. So, and yeah. So, but one thing I wanted to mention, I think Tim, you did say anyway that So we reached this license deal with Nordic, focusing on the low power wide area portfolio license. But there are many other companies. I think licensing in IoT has been happening for more than a decade, especially like 2G, 3G, and maybe there hasn't been much talk about that. But I think Qualcomm has mentioned that in some events. And this shows that there are, I mean, of course, Qualcomm is in a different position, but this shows that there are some established licensing practice, and that module makers are perhaps aware of this. So I think instead of, I know that the IoT OEMs are perhaps really small, a lot of them, not all, like Patrick said. Yeah. So, but I think we could, instead of just saying, focusing on how feeling to, or maybe thinking we cannot do anything about it, maybe we can. Maybe we could just say, module makers, you are quite large enough to take on the responsibility and to, do something about it, or come to the table with us.
So basically, one idea would be putting pressure on those module makers by telling OEMs to only accept suppliers that really have a license and therefore can identify IPR?
Well, I think yes, but I think that would only work if the IoT OEMs actually raise that issue.
Okay.
I don't think if the IoT OEMs think, oh, well, we don't care, then I think they have to also question the terms and conditions.
One thing I always wondered is if licensing happens on different levels, isn't that also increasing somehow complexity that, if now a certain company approaches, an OEM, some of their suppliers have the license, others don't. There's a combination of licensed and not licensed modules. Is that a complication that really matters, or is that also one concern of licensing at different levels?
So let's say if some module makers have some licenses, and then from some patent owners, and then the others that haven't licensed those module makers will approach the OEMs. Yeah, I think that's a bit of a mess. That's why we need established SEP licensing practices. I think in the end, it all comes to money. So,
maybe I can also mention a short comment on, if you look at this overall IoT market in general, how we see it is that majority of this market is today is there's no licensing, there's no SEP licensing in IoT in general. If you look outside sellers, so there are 10,000 SMEs here that are not used to this at all. So if you introduce licensing across all levels here, it's going to be very challenging for them, I think, to in general understand what to do. And I understand Patrick's thinking around these big OEMs, and but all these SMEs, they also need to understand what they're going into, right? When they develop a product, there is risk for them to develop something innovative if they have no idea how to get hold of a license. I think that is the more pressing item in this market right now.
That's why we do these webinars, to educate the market. But what I heard a couple of times today, and that's a question maybe for you, Sven. There has been this rumor that everything must be different for IoT. And of course, Christian now raised, there are 20,000 SMEs that do not know what's going on. But how big of a problem is that really from your point of view? And how different is licensing for, let's see, at least for these low power wideband technologies compared to, smartphones or automotive as another industry vertical?
Well, I think not having access to information is a problem. I think if you don't have information, you don't know what the risk is, and if the risk is high, you see less investment. I don't think that is what the IoT market needs. So I think what the IoT market needs is to know what IP obligations comes with the technology you choose. I mean, cellular IoT is not the only technology out there. You have other technologies out there too. One thing what we try to do, at least with this pool, is to tell the market what the IP obligations are, so they can include that when they do the business decisions, and not make IP deciding issues not to go somewhere because they don't know what the risks or what costs are there that are involved. So, I mean, what patent pools intends to do is to decrease transaction costs and decrease frictions on the markets. And I think this is one of the things too. So I think, and that is also one of the reasons why we go out. I mean, we have mentioned here, IoT is not a new technology. It's been around for years. And the same goes for NB-IoT and LTE-M, which have been around for more than half of a decade already. But I think it's also true to say that the deployment of the technology and the solutions in the market is still relatively new. Often when you see licensing programs, you see them coming in a bit late, which is a problem for the market. So I think it's good that both Nokia and Huawei, and I guess it's cool, go out and tell the market what the rules are. You have seen problems before, example for LTE and smartphones. When LTE came out, you had quite a large number of companies who didn't include IP cost in when they started making the smartphones, which means that they had a difficulty paying the royalties because the margins weren't high enough. They hadn't included in the bill of materials. If that happens, you have a problem because it will create a lot of friction when the IP holders ask companies to respect the IP they're using. You also see it in other contractual terms, for example, the automotives, where you have the suppliers that agree to some contractual terms, indemnities, for example, which they may not have done if they were aware of the IP obligations that they took on by including those terms. So I think information is very important for the market as a whole.
No, that makes sense. Thank you, Sven.
Yeah, and maybe to mention too, I think that's also important to mention when we talk about cellular IoT. Cellular IoT is an open standard. That means it's not proprietary. It's a number of companies who offer the technology for open use on an open market. That itself is also an ecosystem, which means that you have a number of companies that invested a lot of money in R&D, and I can't recall Nokia's number by heart here, but I remember hearing it before, and it's a very significant annual figure that comes out. And I think implementation and innovation goes hand in hand here. It needs to be mutual beneficial. So I think it's good that it comes out here that what the market has to expect.
Understood. Thank you very much, Sven. And last but not least, back to you, Christian. And your deal, at least the first public deal with Huawei. And you already said a little bit that you feel, OEMs should also think about and care about taking a license. Do you expect any other SEP owners to offer you a license? For example, Qualcomm, who has in the past done that to module makers, or you have any other licenses there?
I think we see, I can say, I'm not going to go much in detail, I think, but I think we have fruitful discussions on a model of licensing to Nordic, so that basically when buying a component in an IoT market, licensing is taken care of for all our customers, which is what I strongly believe that our customers are looking for today. But of course, I can't say a lot of detail, but I guess there is a, growing understanding of at least that a view on component level can also be efficient in this market.
And do you feel that taking a license from a company like Huawei and now paying royalties put you in any disadvantage yet compared to competitors who haven't done that and who may have lower costs?
I think you'll touch on it, right? That there are component manufacturers out there that indemnify their customers without really explaining to their customer what the risk is. And in a market where I think you need to understand that a lot of the companies here, they are not aware of this at all. There's very limited awareness, and that puts us in a disadvantage, I would say, today. So there need to be a bit more pressure on either the OEMs taking a license or giving a license to component manufacturer, and ensure that we license through the value chain in general, right? To create a fair market.
Right. It's a little bit the chicken and egg problem. If you're the first one, it's always tough to do that, even though it's a great thing to do.
I think we have been very deliberate in that, also because, as I mentioned, that we see this market as a market where there's a lot of opportunity, right? And who heard about Fitbit before they started, right? We have a lot of those companies today, and the challenge by waiting until they become a big OEM is that they may not even invest in if they have no idea what the license cost will be or how to get a license. So we think that this risk and this unknown today is limiting some of our customers to take the big step and some innovation in the market. And we need to help reduce that risk or create some more awareness around it to help drive the market forward.
No, great. Very interesting. We do have one question here from the audience, or another one here, but the first one I just read. I think I would point that to you, Sven, because it's about I don't know if it's a competitor, but there's of course rumors about Avanci coming out with an IoT program as well. Some people think it's a LTE Cat 1 program. In those markets, do you think it makes sense that several pools have programs? Do you see them as a competitor, or do you see that even as a positive sign that it increases the market and awareness? Any comments on this?
Not more that it's hard for me to comment on what Avanci will do, because I don't know that. I think that's up to them to answer. I mean, generally, what pools want to do is to simplify the market. If I think two pools that covers 2 pools, let's say with 50 IP holders each, is much better for the market than 100 individual licensors out there, right? So if it's 1 or 2 pools, it's still better than no pools. Whether or not there will be some kind of competition within patent pools, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, no, thanks for the comment here. There's another question, and I think it ties a little bit into my question also about complexity. If a module maker takes a license and not an OEM, that of course in certain products, certain modules may be included, and some modules have a license, others don't, which would in the end, the OEM still make to pay a license, right? Because not all of the modules are licensed. Is that a similar thing that you see in the market? Is that exactly the challenge with licensing on the module level?
Well, I think there's challenges regardless of which level you choose to license on. I think module levels is easy. There's fewer players there, but I mean OEM but there's challenges there too. I think one of them is compliance. For example, if you pick up a device on the market, how do you know if it is licensed or not? If you don't know where those modules went into, right? End user product level license has its own issues, with the number of fragmentation in this market, in this particular market specifically, I would say. So it's all challenges. I think if you want to license this market, you need to have you need to know what you're doing.
Interesting. And I didn't ask you that, Sven, but the Sysvel pool is also targeted to OEMs, right?
That's the current authority that we have, yes. But I think for a patent pool, our job is to decrease transaction costs. So if we can find a solution that where it's more efficient to license on other levels, I think we're open for that as well. But not currently.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much. So we are at the hour, and still.
I'm not sure.
Sorry, yes.
Sorry, I was going to say, Tim, I'm not sure what the question, like what kind of use case, for IoT products would include several modules. Cars, yes, maybe something else a bit more complex. But when it comes to, the different licensing for us, I would say again, this would work well at license at module level if all the module makers were to take a license, or the majority. Yeah. And in that case, I think things would be resolved. And and several connectivity modules. I'm not sure if she's referring to different categories, like LTE categories. But if so, there is a way to work that out. We can discuss in another webinar or something. Yeah.
I heard the problem is even on the OEM level, because if someone licensed, let's say, to Sysvel and they still have Wi-Fi in, they still don't have a license. We also have a Wi-Fi option, Sven, so you can offer it all. But there are even technology differences that may go into one OEM. So even if you have all that license as an OEM, doesn't mean you're all covered, right? So I think that argument at least could work both ways. But guys, we are up the hour. I think before people are leaving, I want to give you the chance to give your final statements. I always like to hear one final statement of all of you. What do you want the audience to remember from this webinar? And Patrick, I haven't heard from you for a while. Why don't you get started?
I'm happy to. So I have also several times heard the number, 10, 20,000 SMEs, that would be an issue for the market. I don't think there's a whole lot of proof for that. It's a kind of headline raising argument, but it's not the reality that at least I operate in. So I think we need to do decision based on facts when we can operate in the market. And I think one of the arguments that's often raised that, well, those SMEs don't have access to the information. I think I have been doing this for 10 years, and access to information is very rarely the reason why companies are not licensed. So I think we need to tackle the real issues in licensing and not create headlines like this. There are actually many reasons for licensing on the OEM level. And actually that has worked really, really well for the industry so far. So I would be very, very careful before breaking that model and actually at least kind of try out to find the facts of why it has operated well. On a kind of positive note, so the cellular industry has worked really, really well for years, and the kind of open standards that, as Sven mentioned, have been a huge success story for creating this market. So I think we should try to enable the continued growth of that market and try to follow the principles that have actually worked so far. So I think by doing that, we're going to be in a very good place in a couple of years, having a similar seminar as this one again.
Great. I'll be happy to invite you all again. Julia, your final statement.
Yeah, so I would probably say that the IoT industry needs to take, and especially module vendors need to take SEP licensing more seriously and enter into FRAND negotiations without playing delaying tactics. And I think IoT OEMs also have some responsibility, as it happened in the automotive. So I hope that the industry will, get educated, become more aware of SEP licensing, and yeah. So, but of course, like one thing that we didn't mention today, I think, is that these IoT OEMs are smaller than automotive OEMs, and their profit margins are considerably smaller too. So that's something we are, I think everyone is concerned with, and so I would personally urge IoT OEMs that are listening to carefully look and pay attention to their terms and conditions, and investigate and talk to their suppliers.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Christian, you want to go next?
Yeah, maybe I can follow up quickly on you. I'll say that these are many of them are smaller companies, in the sense that we already discussed that finding the relevant steps in this market is very, very complex. So how should all these companies understand from their point of view what they should pay, what is FRAND, and which patent they use? Companies like Nordic, who actually implement the technology, I would say we are in most cases better suited to do that judgment in this market. And the other thing which I think is very important is that if in the end there are a few big OEMs in this market, I think it's hard to predict who those OEMs will be today and who will bring innovation to the market. And when they don't have access or don't know how to get a license or what the license cost will be or what the rate will be, they're holding back their investment on cellular. And I think that is a challenge we need to take very seriously in the market today.
Thank you, Christian. And last but not least, Sven, final words.
Yeah, no, I think one thing we all have in common here on this panel is that we all want to see the IoT market grow. And I think one thing that the patent pool can do and what Cisco can do here is to offer a solution for the market with a simple one-stop shop where you can capture a lot of potential SEPs and patent owners with a single license where you only need to pay a single royalty, right? So I think with this, and I think simplicity is something that really matters for the IoT market as well. So we hope that with the solution we are here to offer to the market, we hope that we can help the IoT market grow.
Perfect. Well, let me say the final word is for me. Thank you guys for joining this panel. It was great. Lots of insights. I also thank over 200 people who registered and joined our session. That's overwhelming, the interest of that webinar. This all was recorded, so if you're interested in the recording, you can always request that from us, and we'll be happy to make that available and send you the link. For now, I say thank you, and you have a great day. Goodbye.